Welcome back. Michele, overseas observers who follow the process of China's reform and modernization tend to be very critical. Now, let me ask you one tough question. Do you think income gap between rural and urban areas is broadening or narrowing?
That's a very good question. It is narrowing. Over the last 3 years, it has narrowed from about 3.1 times to now 2.8. So now urban citizens make 2.8 times more than rural citizens. And this is pretty much in line with how it was in 1978. If you look at the trend, the urban to rural income has gone down from the 1980s to the 1990s, and then has gone up again, and then in the last 10 years has remained pretty much stable at around 3. In the last 3 or 4 years has gone down a little bit. However, we need to make a compromise, because a wide income disparity is the very engine of migratory flow. So the higher the gap, the more migrants go to the city. Now, if we narrow the gap, we meet the social target of making...
doesn't agree.
Because people don't go
I'm not sure income gap is motivation for people to go to city or moving. I think it's the wages or somehow, wages and payment or economic gain out of you investing into that sector makes people to migrate. So the resource efficiency make people move. I'm not sure gap itself would create or motivate people to move between the places.
Well,
I think it's
I because I agree with you, it's not the income, in fact, it's what they save. Now, if the income is, again, only 3 times, but the cost of living in the city is more than in the countryside, basically people put in the pockets much less than they would. And I agree, that's not the only reason. But we notice...
the authorities at different levels have not only rescinded agricultural taxes, that's been practiced for centuries in this country, but also constructed much of the infrastructure. For example, roads, 要想富先修路. I mean, if you want to get rich, you have to construct roads. They also provide villages with electricity as part of the power grid, far-flung network of power grid in this country over the past decades. However, with the magnetic appeal, using mobile phone, watching television, young people start to admire the prosperity in urban areas, and they keep flocking to the more prosperous and more developed urban areas. So therefore, do you think the villages and rural areas around the high risk of being abandoned? They're becoming decaying. So what do you think of the sense of desperation event?
I think it's yes or no. I think given China's divided and rural-urban ecosystem, rural people would never abandon their home because that's the last resort of safety net. But you would see fewer people in the rural areas. You would see elderly and only young with babies and those. I'm not worried about that. I'm more worried about in the future that whether you can attract enough people to coming back to do business or to run agriculture. That's something that people worry about. Right now, it's only women and elderly people are working in agriculture sector. So I would like to have I think a reduction of size of the rural population is a phenomenon worldwide. It's not only happening in China. So it's not unique to China. The key is that whether those who left behind would get a proper care, and those who moved to the cities would be able to settle in the urban areas. That again comes to that artificially divided rural urban
I'm afraid
system.
the issue of bread and butter is at the primary stage top priority and concern for much of the rural population who are mired and struggling against the issue of poverty. However, what do you think of the issue of loneliness for those who are left behind? The elderly, the women, the children who are not able to see their parents to enjoy very happy family life. I mean, some of the elders choose to commit suicide after finishing the basic issue of primary education for their grandchildren. I mean, this is increasingly a tragedy.
This is, I tell you, you're right at pointing this out. This is one of the biggest problems, much more than money, because the thing you mentioned before, people looking at the mobile phone and they're attracted to go to the city, is actually a disaster for the social tissue of the country. So people do go to the city because they like the city, tall buildings with glasses, maybe a little bit of money, maybe a little bit of entertainment, maybe a little bit of future income hope, and because because of that, they sacrifice family ties. Now, sacrificing family ties is, in one word, a disaster for any country, because it breaks down not just the social, but the family relationship. And what happens is, of course, divorce rate goes up in China. Children grow with the grandparents, 2 generations, T-2. So they live with people who were born in the 1940s and 50s. And we know that the China society has changed so much, but people's minds don't change as fast as the society. So these young children are left with 70-year-old people who think like, in the 50s. And
I mean, those who do cross-cultural studies will be left quite embarrassed, because left children as a phenomenon is totally illegal in the West.
Yes, we cannot do it, and we don't.
What I wanted to say is that this is not really, I wouldn't want to say a disaster. It's a rational choice of a family. If they don't go out to look for a job, they cannot have income to feed the family. So they have to. But the key is that what government can do to avoid those things. For example, you say left behind children are vulnerable. How about those who move with their parents to the urban areas? And those kids are also not fairly treated, because in the migrant schools, they cannot get into public school because they're not part of this city.
Are you talking about the hukou system?
It's not a hukou system. The welfare benefit system all go with hukou. Say, for example, China have free compulsory education for all. But if you're not in your registered hometown, you don't get benefit in Beijing, because that's not belong to you. It belongs to the Beijing residents. So the key for me is that there are things to fix this. I wouldn't want the people who move to the city to go back because their children need to care. So more should be done to for the central government to address the issue, rather than you let the market do. For example, in Beijing, lots of migrant kids are in the privately run, unregulated, low-quality migrant schools. And we follow the kids for longer time. We find that the longer they stay in the migrant schools, the poorer their school performance.
But you may have ignored yet another interesting phenomenon. More and more NGOs are doing charity. They donate clothing, books, teaching materials to the migrant kids in urban areas. Having said this, what do you think of the huge success of the pilot program in Chongqing? They have been able to manage the rural-urban integration schemes to combine the prosperous urban areas with underdeveloped rural areas. What kind of illuminating lessons can we draw from what they have achieved?
In Chongqing is a very interesting case, and I think it is not as successful as it looks, because there's been a success of integrating, I think you've done more study than I have in the area. There's been an initial success, but now the city is stuck in the middle. And it's not clear if this is going to be a city that grows or a city that shrinks. One is because you have other places nearby like Chengdu, which is at a level of development much better. So if I were to live in the countryside of the Chongqing area, I would prefer to go to Chengdu. If I have to leave parents, children, I'll go to Chengdu, not Chongqing.
Fair enough. The last question is very much about the media hype on encouraging farmers to rent their contracted land based on their willingness in the rural areas. How successful is this project?
Well, I think
we're talking about driving force.
Driving forces. China needs to go for agriculture needs to go for modernization, right? So one obstacle is that farm sites are too small, and then lots of farmers who move to the cities, they don't use their land as a primary source of income. So in another way, they don't tend their land properly. So land consolidation would be an ideal way, or emerging ideal way for agriculture modernization and new technology adaptation, utilization. The problem is that you have to have a system to encourage land rental activities, where people can voluntarily lease their land or rent their land to the outside to the others to do it a better job, and then they move to the city. So, but to do that, you need to be very careful to settle the confirmation of user rights. Right. So China started the confirmation of user rights last year, but it's not completed yet. If you don't have a proper identification or certification about this land, user rights is yours, and you're going to have a tendency, maybe in the future, you cannot claim your land back. So farmers are reluctant to rent the land out. So that's something we have to think about.
What do you think of the catalyst, if any, for solving the issue of income gap?
Between rural and urban.
Yes, of course. We're talking about the driving force, the catalyst for rural income.
I think there should be investment in making, instead of making farmers become poor urban dweller, the policy should be to make farmers rich farmers. And China has the advantage to look at the West.
We see the quiet shift in population migration. But you're watching dialogue with Lin Xiuzhang and Michele Geraci. We haven't been able to address the issue of environmental protection. The huge industrial waste have indeed posed a very serious problem for the health of the rural population. But I'll see you next time. Bye.